Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another installment of Creepypasta Radio. Back with stories to give you nightmares. That is, if you dare to fall asleep. This evening we begin with a story about...
I'm putting this out there in hopes that someone will hear it. Anyone. Whatever you do, don't listen to Creepypasta Radio. It's how they turn you.
Apologies for that interruption, ladies and gentlemen. We are doing our best to make sure something like that doesn't happen again. In the meantime, enjoy our first story of the evening, which goes to show you that sometimes old customs never die. We present to you the story, Burial. My great-great-grandmother, ill for quite some time, finally passed away after lying in a coma for several days. My great-great-grandfather was devastated beyond belief, as she was his one true love, and they had been married over 50 years. They were married so long it seemed as if they knew each other's innermost thoughts. After the doctor pronounced her dead, my great-great-grandfather insisted that she was not. They had to literally pry him away from his wife's body so they could ready her for burial. Now, back in those days, they had backyard burial plots, and they didn't drain the body of its fluids. They simply prepared a proper coffin and committed the body, in its coffin, to its permanent resting place. Throughout this process, my great-great-grandfather protested so fiercely that he had to be sedated and put to bed. His wife was buried, and that was that. That night he awoke to a horrific vision of his wife, hysterically trying to scratch her way out of the coffin. He phoned the doctor immediately, and begged to have his wife's body exhumed. The doctor refused, but my great-great-grandfather had this nightmare every night for a week, each time frantically begging to have his wife removed from the grave. Finally, the doctor gave in, and together with local authorities, they exhumed the body. The coffin was pried open, and to everyone's horror and amazement, my great-great-grandmother's nails were bent back, and there were bloody scratch marks on the inside of the coffin. Yikes. That story was pretty much an advertisement for cremation. Our next story is a PSA about what not to feed man's best friend. In the story, The Choking Doberman. My cousin and his wife lived in Sydney with this huge Doberman in a little apartment off Maroubra Road. One night they went out for dinner and a spot of clubbing. By the time they got home it was late, and my cousin was more than a little drunk. They got in the door and were greeted by the dog choking to death in the lounge room. My cousin just fainted, but his wife rang the veterinarian, who was an old family friend, and she agreed to meet her at surgery. The wife drives over and drops off the dog, but decides that she'd better go home and get her hubby into bed. She gets home and finally slaps my cousin into consciousness, but he's still drunk. It takes her almost half an hour to get him up the stairs, and then the phone rings. She's tempted to just leave it, but she decides that it must be important or they wouldn't be ringing that late at night. As soon as she picks up the phone, she hears the vet's voice, screaming. "Thank God I got you in time. Leave the house now. No time to explain." Then the vet hangs up. Because she's such an old family friend, the wife trusts her, and so she starts getting the hubby down the stairs and out of the house. By the time they've made it all the way out, the police are outside. They rush up the front stairs, past the couple, and into the house, but my cousin's wife still doesn't have a clue what's going on. The vet shows up and says, "Have they got him? Have they got him?" "Have they got who?" says the wife, starting to get really pissed off. "Well, I found out what your dog was choking on. It was a human finger." Just then the police drag out a dirty, stubby man who is bleeding profusely from one hand. "Hey, Sarge," one of them yells. "We found him in the bedroom." Looks like it's kibbles and bits for Fido from now on. Our final story of the evening is a rather lengthy one, but it just goes to show you how little family can protect you sometimes. We present to you Doors. I was adopted. I never knew my real mother. Rather, I knew her at one time, but I left her side when I was too little to be able to remember. I loved my adopted family, though. They were so kind to me. I ate well, I lived in a warm and comfortable house, and I got to stay up pretty late. Let me tell you about my family real fast. First, there's my mother. I never called her Mom or anything like that. I just called her by her first name, Janice. She didn't mind at all, though. I called her that for so long, I don't think she even noticed. Anyhow, she was a very kind woman. I think that she's the one that recommended my adoption in the first place. Sometimes I would lay my head against her in front of the television and she would tickle my back with her nails. She's one of those Hollywood mothers. Second, there's Dad. His real name was Richard, but he never really liked me much, so I began to refer to him as Dad in a desperate attempt to gain his affection. It didn't work. I think that no matter what I called him, he would never love me as much as his own child. That's understandable, so I really didn't press the matter. The most notable attribute of Dad was his unmoving sternness. He was not afraid to pop his children when they did something wrong. I found that out before I could use the restroom properly. He didn't hesitate to spank me. Well, I'm in line, and it's because of his methods. Lastly is my sister. Little Emily was really young when I was adopted, so we were about the same age, but she was slightly older. I like to think of her as my little sister, though. We got along better than any sibling could possibly get along. We would always stay up late together and just talk. Well, she did a lot of the talking. I mostly just listened because I loved her. It was a great setup that we had. We were short on bedrooms, and because I didn't want to sleep in the living room by myself when I was little, I had a pallet set up for me, next to her bed on the floor. This is where I have slept since, but it was cool with me because I enjoyed being with her, and I had always felt pretty protective of my little sis. Everything changed on a horrible Wednesday night. I was at home taking a nap when little Emily opened the front door. The sound of the door opening pulled me to a state of consciousness, and I walked from the room down the hall to the living room. That's when I first remembered it was Wednesday. I was never any good at keeping track of what day it was. Actually, I'll just go ahead and say it. My sense of time was horrible. But nevertheless, I knew it was Wednesday because Emily had just come home from her church's youth group gathering. She walked in the front door and hugged me, and then was followed by Dad and Janice. "You have a good nap?" Janice said teasingly as she ruffled up my hair. I just shook my head away and snorted in a manner that clearly expressed that I was teasing back with her. "Don't you snort at your mother like that," said my father gruffly with authority. He shut the door behind him and hung up his coat. I was clearly joking, I growled under my breath. He must not have heard me because I didn't feel him smack me. Emily then proceeded to our room and I followed. She started telling me about her day. You know, usual teenage girl stuff. But I listened so that she would feel better. After her summary, she suggested watching TV and I obliged, and jumped onto the couch as she was going for the remote. She rolled her eyes at my little brother-like immaturity and scooted me over and sat down. The TV turned on and we watched it together until the sun went down. Emily was the kind of girl that instead of watching cartoons and soap operas would rather watch Discovery and Animal Planet and National Geographic. I like those too, so I didn't mind. Actually, those are the only channels that can hold my attention. So it got late and Janice walked up behind the sofa. "Emily, it's past your bedtime. Turn off the television and go to your room." "You too," she pointed at me. Emily turned off the program we were watching grudgingly and stood up. She started down the hallway to her room. As I followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. We went into our room and Emily turned off the light. Just as she did, I caught a flash of movement out the corner of my eye. It was out the window. But as soon as I redirected my line of sight, it was gone. I still remained alert for my sister's sake. I laid there in the darkness with nothing but the thin ray of light coming from the street lamp outside to illuminate the room. It wasn't much. Time and time again, I could have sworn that I heard subtle sounds just out the window. A twig break, leaves crunching, clothes jostling. And all the while I could smell a faint stench of sweat and blood. I kept my eyes open most of the night. The sounds outside subsided, and the smell left my nose. I began to feel at ease. My eyelids closed. Not long after that, I heard a very loud crash on the other side of the house. I was up in an instant. "There's someone in the house," I barked with extreme adrenaline coursing through me. "Wake up!" I shrilly pleaded with Emily. She did, and as soon as I saw her sit up, I ran to my parents' room. Dad was dead. His neck was splayed open and gaping as blood spilled out of it, off the bed and onto the floor. I saw that the master bathroom's door was closed, and just before it, on the outside, was a man. A man. I don't even feel comfortable calling it that. He was very large and rugged. He turned around and saw me, and that's when I saw him accurately for the first time. I won't forget. His eyes were large and beady and trapped with lust. He was styling a beard that was badly unkempt with blood dripping off. His clothes were dirty and his face was cold. Just then I noticed the same horrid smell of sweat and blood from earlier, but this time it was overwhelming. He saw me. He saw me and grinned with a set of yellow, crooked teeth. That smile threw me off. I thought that I was going to die. But then he turned back to the bathroom door, completely unperturbed to my presence. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I just yelled and cried. I watched as he shouldered through the door that was Mom's only protection. I watched as he raised the large razor blade that he was carrying. I watched as he sliced her open and tore her to shreds. I then heard something. The last thing I wanted to hear. It was Emily's scream coming from behind me. The large monstrosity looked up from my butchered mother and stared at my little sister. I was distraught. He stood up quickly and started walking toward us. My sister turned and ran, and I was at a loss when he bypassed me and went straight after her. Why was she still in the house? Had she not assessed the situation and run? Apparently not. And now she was dead, and I was alone. I expected the man to kill her, as he had the rest of my family, but I was sadly mistaken. He grabbed her by the arm and jerked her as a way to make it clear that he was in control. He dragged her through the house. I was making all the noise I could now, hoping and praying that someone would come to my aid. He mustn't take her. Not her. As he passed me, I backed against a wall and whimpered with terror. Why? He didn't respond except by putting his free hand on my head while Emily screamed in the other. and saying, "Good boy." He gave another crooked grin and a very cold, unnatural laugh. I followed him to the door where he dragged my helpless sister after him. He opened it, pulled her out, and slammed it shut behind him. I'm now sitting in the house with my mutilated adopted parents, shivering and whimpering with dismay. He's out there with her, doing who knows what to her, and I can't do anything. I would if I could, but I can't. I would chase after them in a heartbeat, but I can't. I sit here, looking at the front door. I look down at my paws. If only I could open doors. Well, I certainly hope you enjoyed this installment of Creepypasta Radio. We'll be back again soon, with more tales to chill you to the bone. Have a nice evening. And remember,
never stop listening.
Don't listen to Creepypasta Radio. It's how we turn you. Something about the radio waves.